This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. If you click on the link in the description below, it'll take you to their store and they'll know I sent you there. Hello everyone, I'm Nita Hone, and it is Friday, so that means it's time for another MTG Top 10. This is a special episode because I'm making it in support of Team Trees, a charity event run by the Arbor Day Foundation, which seeks to raise $20 million to plant 20 million new trees before the end of the year to combat increasing deforestation. Trees are very important to Earth's ecosystem, and if you want to help them get planted, well, that's what this charity is for. In the description below, you can find a link to the charity. I will also be donating any ad revenue from this video to Team Trees. Let's try to make the world better. So, how do we talk about trees in Magic? Well, it really isn't that hard. The game has lots of trees. The bulk of the list is made up of tree folk, sentient trees that occupy many of Magic's planes. They are trees that aren't going to just sit idly by, they're going to fight back. They, of course, are appalled by deforestation, so they want you to help with Team Trees if you can. But there are also other trees in the game that don't share the sentience of the tree folk. In the end, any card that was a tree was considered for this list, even the non-sentient ones. So to be eligible for this list, a card had to have the tree folk creature type, be able to turn a creature into a tree folk, make a tree folk creature token, or be a tree. In all, there were a little over 100 cards eligible for this list, and in this video, we're going to talk about the 10 that have done the most at Magic's highest level of competition. Before we get started, a quick reminder on how to score cards in these videos. Pro Tour and Mythic Championship top 8s, as well as Legacy and Vintage Championship top 8s are worth 2 points, and a Grand Prix top 8 is worth 1 point. Now, let's look at number 10. At number 10, it is the first of 8 tree folk to make the list. This one is Dungrove Elder. The Elder really likes trees, as the effect of the card and the flavor text tell us, and it can become an absolutely massive creature that is difficult to kill thanks to hexproof. In a deck that is mono green, it is going to become increasingly large as the game goes on. The Elder only has a single point, and it came in a Primeval Titan deck in Standard. The two work well together since the Titan searches up more lands, and the Elder gets bigger the more forests you have. At number 9, it is Heartwood Storyteller. If you're really annoyed by your opponent's control deck, Heartwood Storyteller is the card for you. It punishes opponents who like casting non-creature spells, and that's a powerful effect against them, since now you're going to get a 2-for-1 for any counterspell or removal they cast. If the Storyteller resolves and they want to get rid of it, you still get to draw the card when they cast the removal spell, so you're coming out ahead. It saw play in Time Spiral Block Constructed in the sideboard of a couple of green aggro decks, who could bring it in against opponents running lots of spot removal. The Storyteller has never seen play outside of Time Spiral Block, and the fact that it can be countered really holds it back from being played in other formats where one is looking to punish control decks. At number 8, I have Weatherseed Treefolk. A 5-mana 5/3 with Trample is a little bit clunky, even in the days of Urza's Legacy. But when you add that return to your hand clause to the mix, you have a pretty threatening creature. Trample means that it isn't like your opponent can just keep chump blocking the thing to slow you down. It's going to be hard for them to effectively block this, and every time it comes back, it's going to give you serious card advantage. Weatherseed Treefolk had a single top 8 from Worlds in 1999, where it appeared in a green Stompy deck. In other words, a mono-green aggro deck. At number 7, I have Lignify, an aura that turns a creature into a 0/4 treefolk with no abilities. While this type of removal spell normally isn't awesome, for green, this is a nice removal spell, since really green doesn't get very many of them. Sure, they get an 0/4, but it stops any threatening creature from doing, well, anything. It even shuts off activated and static abilities, which not all aura-based removal is capable of doing. What's more is, it has the tribal type and is a treefolk itself, so if you have any tribal payoffs for treefolk, this will get you extra synergy with those. It saw some play in Standard, oddly enough in the sideboards of fairy decks. While Lignify is pretty much a staple in EDH, it hasn't been played in competitive formats since 2007. Next, it is Woodfall Primus, the biggest treefolk to make the list. The Primus is 8 mana, but it gives you at least 8 mana worth of value. It has a reasonably large body in Trample, making it a threat on most board states, but when it comes down, it also blows up a non-creature permanent, so at worst, the Primus will destroy a land, and that means it's always going to be destroying something. Then, you add Persist to the mix, which means that this guy is going to come back as a 5/5 and nuke another non-land permanent, and that's some serious value altogether. This can easily amount to a 4-for-1, assuming your opponent uses a whole card to kill the Primus both times, and you blow up a non-land permanent both times. As you would expect though, 8 mana is a lot, and not something most decks can really afford to pay. So the decks that have run the Primus over the years generally have to cheat it into play early. In Modern, it sees play in decks running through the Breach, which it works quite well with, since you don't really lose the creature. It will get sacrificed at the end of the turn, then come back with Persist and destroy another non-creature permanent. In Legacy, it has been played in Reanimator decks, as well as those looking to abuse Sneak Attack, which is very similar to Through the Breach. The Primus is another card on the list that's also a staple in EDH, but he hasn't found any success at a Pro Tour or Grand Prix since 2017. At number 5, it is Wicker Bough Elder. Reasonably efficient creatures who come with Natural Eyes attached to them always tend to see a little bit of play, and that's what we have here. In some ways, this is like a 5-mana 4/4 that nukes an artifact or enchantment, a card that frequently sees play, but it is even better than that in most cases. That's because you can play this and then have the threat of activation up forever, since you can use this ability at instant speed, meaning you can do it in response to things and really wreck your opponent. In block, it saw play in the Treefolk Tribal deck, a deck we will go more in depth with further up the list, which had the ability to search up the Elder when it needed to. It also saw a little bit of play in standard sideboards. At number 4, we have Vitu-Ghazi, the City Tree, the first card we've seen so far that doesn't have anything to do with Treefolk. However, it made this list by virtue of, well, being a tree. Vitu-Ghazi is obviously an absolutely massive tree, given that it is the entire guild hall for the Selesnya Conclave on Ravnica. Vitu-Ghazi is a powerful non-basic land in that it gives you a nice place to sink your mana in the late game by churning out a Saproling every turn. That might sound small, but it is the kind of effect that really snowballs. In Ravnica block constructed, it was played alongside Glare of Subdual in what became known as the Ghazi Glare deck. This deck looked to use Glare to basically lock the opponent's creatures out of the game, something that the Saprolings the City Tree churned out would help you do. This deck was really only viable in block, but it was arguably the best deck in that format, putting up 3 top 8s at Worlds in 2005 and another at Pro Tour Charleston in 2006. At number 3, it is Treefolk Harbinger. On the plane of Lorwyn, Treefolk are one of the main tribes, and this Harbinger is part of a cycle of Harbingers who search up a creature of the creature type of one of those tribes. Treefolk Harbinger is nice since on turn 1 you can guarantee you draw a much needed Treefolk on your next turn. The fact it can also search up a forest in a pinch doesn't hurt either. The Harbinger was primarily played in Doran the Siege Tower decks. We're going to meet Doran very soon, so I'm not going to go in depth, but suffice it to say he is a super powerful Treefolk, and having the Harbinger able to guarantee you draw him is a pretty powerful effect. It also made cards like Wicker Bough Elder better because you could search them up. Doran decks saw play in block, standard, and extended, and Treefolk Harbinger was part of some versions of the deck in those formats. At number 2, we have Tree of Redemption, the other non-Treefolk on the list, but obviously, it's a tree. It may not be sentient like Treefolk, but it has a massive amount of toughness, which matters because not only can it block well, it can exchange your life total for its very high toughness. The idea there being that it's going to gain you a ton of life. The tree was played in a lot of block and standard sideboards, where it was particularly effective against aggro decks, between being really hard to chop down and being able to gain you a ton of life when you needed it to. It was a pretty heavily played card in both formats, with even aggro decks running it for use against the mirror. And at number 1, it is, not surprising anybody, Doran the Siege Tower. Doran has one of those effects that completely changes the game, and if you're playing with him, you're ready for that change and can take advantage of it, while your opponent won't be able to so much. Even on his own, Doran amounts to a 3-mana 5/5, which is some serious business. He just so happens to make cards that are heavily played in green, like Tarmogoyf and Birds of Paradise, hit harder too. Doran decks were one of the better aggro decks around in both block and standard, and those decks also had a significant impact on both extended and modern as well. Well, those are the best trees in the entire game. If you like these trees, consider donating to help support trees on our own plane. Again, you can find a link in the description below that will show you how, and all of the revenue that this video makes will be donated to help the charity event. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too, and if you want to make sure you catch future MTG Top 10s, don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching.